The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1883, when the dust from the cattle drive still hung thick in the air around Calico, California. And Yates Norton was beginning to think he would spend the rest of his life alone on his ranch with nothing but cattle and memories for company. He stood on the porch of his modest ranch house, the envelope trembling slightly in his calloused hands as he read the careful penmanship one more time. Miss Eleanor Ashford had accepted his proposal, such as it was, and would be arriving on the Friday stage from San Francisco. Yates was 32 years old, weather-worn and honest, and he had never imagined that a woman like her, educated and refined according to the matchmaker's description, would agree to marry a simple rancher like himself. But the loneliness of the California high desert had a way of making a man desperate enough to reach out across the miles for companionship, even if it meant marrying a complete stranger. The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxious preparation. Yates cleaned the ranch house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that had not seen a proper wash in months. He aired out the spare bedroom, which would be hers until they were properly married, and he made sure the kitchen was stocked with provisions from the general store in town. His neighbor, an older rancher named Thomas who had known Yates since he was a boy, came by to help him fix the squeaky hinge on the front door and to offer some advice about married life that mostly consisted of listen more than you talk and never go to bed angry. Friday arrived with a cloudless sky and temperatures that would climb well into the 90s by noon. Yates dressed in his best shirt, a blue cotton one that his mother had made for him before she passed 5 years prior, and his cleanest pair of trousers. He hitched his horse to the wagon and made the hour-long journey into Calico, his heart pounding harder with each mile. The town was bustling with its usual activity when he arrived. Miners coming down from the silver claims in the hills, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, women in their long dresses hurrying between the mercantile and the butcher. Yates tied his horse outside the stage office and waited, removing his hat and running his fingers through his dark hair repeatedly, a nervous habit he could not seem to shake. The stage was late, as it often was, and by the time it rolled into town in a cloud of dust and the thunder of hooves, Yates had worked himself into such a state of anxiety that he nearly turned around and rode home. But then the door opened, and a young woman stepped down onto the wooden platform, and all thoughts of leaving vanished from his mind. Eleanor Ashford was beautiful in a way that seemed almost out of place in the harsh desert landscape. She was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark brown hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet and eyes the color of spring grass. Her dress was modest but well made, a deep burgundy that had somehow survived the dusty journey relatively intact. She clutched a worn carpetbag in both hands and looked around the town with an expression that Yates could not quite read. Fear, perhaps, or uncertainty, or maybe just exhaustion from the long trip. He approached slowly, hat in hand, and cleared his throat. "Miss Ashford." She turned to face him, and up close he could see the fine lines of worry around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "Yes, you must be Mr. Norton. Yates, please." He reached for her bag, and she hesitated only a moment before handing it over. "Welcome to Calico. I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady, "but I am grateful to have arrived safely." They stood there for a moment, two strangers bound by letters and circumstance, neither quite knowing what to say next. Finally, Yates gestured toward his wagon. "I have the ranch about an hour from here. I thought we might stop by the hotel first, let you rest and freshen up before we head out if you would like." Something flickered across Eleanor's face, relief mixed with something else. "That would be very kind, thank you." The hotel in Calico was nothing fancy, just a two-story building with clean rooms and a dining area on the first floor. Yates paid for a room and carried Eleanor's bag upstairs, setting it just inside the door. "I will be downstairs when you are ready," he said. "Take all the time you need." Eleanor nodded, and he left her there, closing the door gently behind him. Downstairs, he ordered coffee and sat at a table by the window, watching the street and trying to calm the storm of emotions in his chest. She was even more lovely than he had imagined, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow that spoke of troubles she had not mentioned in her letters. He told himself it was just nerves, that she was as anxious about this arrangement as he was, but the feeling lingered nonetheless. When Eleanor finally came down an hour later, she had changed into a simpler dress and washed the dust from her face. She looked tired but composed as she joined him at the table. Yates ordered her some lunch, though she only picked at the food, and they made small talk about the weather and the town and the ranch while carefully avoiding any real discussion of what lay ahead. The ride out to the ranch was quiet, the wagon wheels creaking over the rough road while the sun beat down mercilessly. Yates pointed out landmarks along the way, the creek where he got his water, the hills where the cattle grazed, the distant mountains that turned purple in the evening light. Eleanor listened and nodded but said little, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Yates helped her down from the wagon and showed her around. The house was simple but solid, built by his father 20 years ago when this land was even wilder than it was now. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, 2 bedrooms and a small room that served as an office. Outside, there was a barn for the horses, a chicken coop and corrals for the cattle. "It is not much," Yates said, suddenly seeing the place through her eyes and feeling inadequate. "But it is honest work and the land provides." "It is lovely," Eleanor said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Very peaceful." He showed her to the spare bedroom, which he had prepared with fresh linens and wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "This will be yours," he said. "I know we are to be married, but I want you to feel comfortable here. There is no rush for anything." Eleanor turned to look at him, and for the first time since she had stepped off that stage, something in her expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are very kind." That evening, Yates cooked dinner, a simple meal of beans and salt pork with fresh bread he had purchased in town. They ate at the table in the kitchen, the silence between them gradually becoming less awkward as they grew accustomed to each other's presence. Eleanor offered to clean up, and Yates did not argue, instead going out to tend to the horses and check on the cattle one last time before dark. When he came back inside, Eleanor was sitting by the fire with a cup of tea, staring into the flames with that same troubled expression he had noticed earlier. Yates sat down in the chair across from her and cleared his throat. "Eleanor, if you are having second thoughts about all this, I would understand. I know this is a strange arrangement and we are practically strangers. If you want to go back to San Francisco, I will take you to the stage myself. No questions asked." She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said honestly. "I asked you here because I hoped we might build a life together, but I want you to be here because you want to be, not because you feel trapped." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup. "I do want to be here," she said finally. "I have nowhere else to go if I am being honest, but I need to tell you something, Yates. Something I should have told you in my letters, but I was afraid if you knew the truth, you would never agree to let me come." Yates felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "All right, I am listening." Eleanor set down her cup and folded her hands in her lap, her shoulders squared as if preparing for a blow. "Before I came here, I was living in San Francisco. I worked as a seamstress in a dress shop, barely making enough to pay for a room in a boarding house. I was surviving, but just barely. And then, she paused, taking a shaky breath. Then I met a man. His name was Charles, and he was charming and well-dressed, and he paid attention to me in a way no one ever had before. He told me he could help me, that he knew ways to make money that did not involve breaking your back over a sewing machine 14 hours a day. Yates said nothing, just waited for her to continue. He taught me how to steal, Eleanor said, the words coming out in a rush now as if she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. Pickpocketing, mostly. We would work the streets near the hotels where the wealthy tourists stayed. I would distract them and Charles would take their wallets, or sometimes I would do it myself. We were good at it, and for a while I told myself it was all right, that the people we stole from had more money than they needed anyway. She looked up at Yates, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But it was not all right. I knew it was not, and the guilt ate at me every day. And then one day we tried to steal from the wrong person, a city marshal who was not in uniform. Charles ran, but I froze, and the marshal caught me. He could have arrested me right there, could have sent me to jail, but instead he looked at me and said that I seemed like I was better than the life I was living. He told me to get out of San Francisco, to start over somewhere far away, and he would not pursue charges. "So you left," Yates said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "I saw an advertisement for the matchmaking service the next day. It felt like a sign, like a chance to escape and become someone better. So I answered it, and when you wrote back, I thought maybe I could start fresh, leave all of that behind. But I could not marry you without telling you the truth. I have been a thief, Yates. I have stolen from people and lied and done things I am deeply ashamed of. And if you want me to leave now, I understand. I truly do." The silence that followed felt endless. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her face pale but resolved, while Yates stared into the fire and processed what she had told him. The crackling of the wood was the only sound in the room, and with each passing second, Eleanor seemed to shrink further into herself. Finally, Yates spoke. "Everyone deserves a second chance here." Eleanor looked up sharply, as if she could not believe what she had heard. "What?" "I said everyone deserves a second chance here," Yates repeated, meeting her gaze. "That is what the West is supposed to be about, is it not? People coming to wild places to escape their pasts and build new lives. Half the folks in Calico are running from something. Failed businesses back east, bad marriages, debts they could not pay, mistakes they wish they could undo. I am not going to judge you for trying to survive the only way you knew how. But I stole from people," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I broke the law. And now you are here and you have been honest with me about it," Yates said. "That takes courage. More courage than I think I would have had in your place. What matters to me is not what you did in San Francisco, but who you want to be here in Calico. If you want to start fresh and build an honest life, then that is what we will do. Together." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, running down Eleanor's cheeks. She covered her face with her hands and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Yates rose from his chair and knelt beside her, unsure if he should touch her, but wanting to offer comfort somehow. "I am sorry," Eleanor gasped. I did not expect. I thought you would send me away for sure." "I am not sending you away," Yates said firmly. "You are welcome here, Eleanor. You are safe here. And whatever happened before, we will leave it in the past where it belongs." She lowered her hands and looked at him through her tears, and something in her expression shifted, the fear and shame giving way to fragile hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what that means to me." Yates smiled gently. "We will figure this out together, one day at a time." That night, Eleanor slept better than she had in months. The weight of her secret finally lifted. And in his own room, Yates lay awake for a long time, thinking about the brave, broken woman who had come into his life and wondering if maybe they could heal each other's loneliness after all. The days that followed settled into a tentative routine. Yates rose early each morning to tend to the ranch, feeding the animals and checking the fences and doing the 100 small tasks that kept the place running. Eleanor took over the household duties, cooking meals and cleaning and learning the rhythms of ranch life. At first, they moved around each other carefully, still strangers in many ways, but gradually the awkwardness began to fade. Eleanor proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker. She learned to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to recognize when a storm was coming by the way the air smelled. Yates taught her how to ride the gentler of his 2 horses, a mare named Daisy, and they would sometimes ride out together in the evenings when the heat had died down, exploring the land and talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of these rides, about 2 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, that they encountered trouble. They had ridden out to check on a section of fence near the northern boundary of Yates's property when they heard shouting. Cresting a small hill, they saw 3 men on horseback chasing a small herd of cattle, Yates's cattle, toward the open range beyond his land. "Rustlers," Yates growled, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Stay here, Eleanor." But Eleanor had already seen the determination in his eyes and the danger ahead. "You cannot face 3 men alone," she said urgently. "We should go back and get help from town." "By the time we get back, those cattle will be long gone," Yates said. He pulled out his rifle and checked that it was loaded. "I am just going to fire some warning shots, scare them off. I am not looking for a fight." Before Eleanor could protest further, he spurred his horse down the hill, shouting at the rustlers to stop. The men turned, surprised to be caught in the act, and for a moment it looked like they might abandon the cattle and flee. But then one of them, a tall man with a scarred face, pulled out his own gun and fired in Yates's direction. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make Yates's horse rear in panic. He managed to stay in the saddle, but his rifle fell to the ground. The rustlers, seeing him now unarmed and alone, began to circle around him, and Eleanor's heart seized with terror. Without thinking, she spurred Daisy forward, riding hard down the hill and shouting at the top of her lungs. It was a foolish thing to do, and she knew it, but she could not just sit there and watch Yates get hurt or killed. The rustlers turned in confusion at this new arrival, and in that moment of distraction, Yates slid from his horse and grabbed his rifle from the dirt. "Get out of here," he shouted, aiming the rifle at the man with the scarred face. "This is my land and these are my cattle, and I will defend both." The rustlers looked at each other, clearly weighing their options. They were still 3 against 2, but Yates was armed now and the woman on the horse was unpredictable. Finally, the scarred man spat on the ground and gestured to his companions. "This is not worth it," he snarled. "Let's go." They rode off, leaving the cattle milling nervously in the afternoon sun. Yates waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle, his hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. He turned to Eleanor, who had dismounted and was standing beside him, her face pale but her chin raised defiantly. "That was incredibly foolish," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Eleanor shot back. "I was not going to just sit there and watch." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then, suddenly, Yates started to laugh. It was a sound of relief and disbelief and something else, and after a moment, Eleanor joined in, the tension breaking like a fever. "You are either very brave or very crazy," Yates said, shaking his head. "Perhaps a bit of both," Eleanor admitted. She looked at him, her expression growing serious. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," he said. "Thanks to you." They rounded up the cattle and drove them back toward the main part of the ranch. And by the time they arrived home, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. Yates unsaddled the horses while Eleanor went inside to start dinner, and when he joined her in the kitchen a short while later, the comfortable silence between them felt different somehow, warmer and more solid. "I reported the incident to the sheriff the next time I went into town," Yates said as they ate. "He said he would keep an eye out for those men, but chances are they have moved on to easier targets by now." Eleanor nodded, pushing food around her plate. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, "about what you said, about everyone deserving a second chance. It made me realize that I have been so focused on leaving my past behind that I have not really thought about what I want my future to look like." "What do you want?" Yates asked gently. She looked up at him, and in the lamplight her eyes seemed to glow. "I want to be someone worthy of your trust. I want to build a life here that I can be proud of. And I want—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "I want to be a real partner to you, not just someone you took in out of pity." "I never pitied you," Yates said firmly. "From the moment you stepped off that stage, I have only admired you. It takes strength to leave everything behind and start over in a strange place. And what you did today, charging down that hill even though you were scared, that was one of the bravest things I have ever seen." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but the thought of something happening to you was even more terrifying." The air between them seemed to shift, charged with something unspoken. Yates reached across the table and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Eleanor, I know we married as strangers, and I do not want to rush anything you are not ready for. But I need you to know that you have come to mean a great deal to me in these past weeks, more than I expected, more than I probably have a right to feel." Eleanor's breath caught. "You have come to mean a great deal to me as well," she said softly. "You have given me something I never thought I would have again, hope and safety, and a place where I can be myself without fear of judgment." "Then let us make this real," Yates said. "Not just a marriage of convenience, but a true partnership. We will take it slow, get to know each other properly, but I would like to start building a real life together, if that is what you want." "It is," Eleanor said, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. "It truly is." They were married properly a month later in the small church in Calico, with Thomas and his wife standing as witnesses, and most of the town in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress she had sewn herself, cream-colored with lace at the collar, and Yates wore his best suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her gently, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a door closing on her old life and a new one opening wide. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Eleanor met the people of Calico properly for the first time, the shopkeepers and ranchers and miners who made up the fabric of the community. They welcomed her warmly, and if any of them wondered about her past, or why a refined city woman had chosen to marry a simple rancher, they kept their questions to themselves. As the evening wore on and the dancing continued, Yates pulled Eleanor outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the hotel's front porch, looking up at the stars that seemed impossibly bright in the desert sky. "Happy?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "Very," Eleanor said, leaning into him. "I never imagined I could feel this way again, like I belong somewhere." "You belong here," Yates said firmly. "With me, for as long as you want." "Forever then," Eleanor said, and she turned to kiss him, and it was different from the chaste kiss they had shared in church, deeper and more promising. They returned to the ranch that night as true husband and wife, and if Eleanor was nervous, Yates's gentleness and patience put her at ease. He was considerate and loving, and afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor felt a contentment she had never known before. She had been so certain that her past mistakes had ruined any chance of happiness, but here in Yates's arms, she began to believe that maybe redemption was possible after all. The seasons changed, and with them, Eleanor and Yates's relationship deepened. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the things that made each other laugh and the topics to avoid when tempers were short. They worked side by side, expanding the ranch and improving the land, and slowly the place began to feel like a true home rather than just a house. Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted the hills like powdered sugar. Yates taught Eleanor how to help with the cattle during the harsh months, how to break ice on water troughs and supplement feed when the grazing was poor. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the books Eleanor had brought from San Francisco, or simply talking about their dreams for the future. It was during one of these evenings in late January of 1884 that Eleanor brought up something that had been on her mind for weeks. "Yates, do you ever think about having children?" He looked up from the harness he was mending, surprised by the question. "I suppose I have," he said carefully. "I always thought I would have a family someday back when I was younger." "Why do you ask?" Eleanor folded her hands in her lap, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I have been feeling unwell in the mornings lately, and I believe I might be with child." Yates set down the harness, his expression transforming from surprise to joy. "Truly, I am not certain yet," Eleanor said quickly, "but the signs are there. I wanted to tell you before I said anything to anyone else." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Eleanor, if you are carrying our child, I would be the happiest man in California. But even if you are not, even if children never come, I want you to know that you are enough for me. You always will be." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now, though the first time she had said them had been difficult, weighted with the fear that he might not feel the same. "I love you too," Yates said, and he kissed her gently. "Whatever happens, we will face it together." Eleanor's pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Calico a few weeks later, and the news spread through the small community like wildfire. Women who Eleanor had only met in passing began stopping by the ranch with gifts and advice, sharing their own experiences and offering help. It was overwhelming at times, but also deeply touching, this sense of being embraced by a community that had once been strange to her. As her belly grew and the baby became more real, Eleanor found herself thinking often about the person she had been back in San Francisco. That desperate, frightened woman who had stolen to survive seemed like someone else entirely now, someone from a different lifetime. She had been so lost then, so certain that she was worthless and beyond saving. But Yates had seen something in her worth saving, and slowly, day by day, she had started to see it too. Spring arrived with wildflowers blooming across the desert and new calves being born in the pastures. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by summer she was heavy with child and moving slowly, but she remained stubbornly independent, insisting on helping with the garden and the chickens even when Yates fretted that she should be resting. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would tell him with a laugh, and he would shake his head but let her do as she pleased, knowing that her spirit was part of what he loved about her. The baby came in late August, on a sweltering afternoon when the temperature climbed past 100 degrees. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the doctor from town and 2 neighbor women who had experience with births. Yates paced outside the bedroom, listening to Eleanor's cries and feeling utterly helpless, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in, that both his wife and child would survive. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair, Yates was allowed into the room to meet his son. Eleanor lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant as she held the baby against her chest. "We have a son," she said softly, looking up at Yates with tears of joy in her eyes. Yates sat carefully on the edge of the bed and gazed down at the tiny person they had created, overwhelmed by love and responsibility in equal measure. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Eleanor." They named him James, after Yates's father, and he became the center of their world. The first months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn, but neither Yates nor Eleanor would have traded it for anything. Watching their son grow and change, seeing pieces of themselves in his face and mannerisms, was a joy beyond anything they had imagined. As James grew from an infant into a curious toddler, Eleanor found herself thinking less and less about her past in San Francisco. The guilt that had once plagued her had not disappeared entirely, but it had faded to something manageable, a reminder of who she had been and how far she had come. She had built a new life here in Calico, a good and honest life, and she was determined to be someone her son could be proud of. One afternoon in the fall of 1885, when James was just over a year old, Eleanor was in town at the general store when a familiar face caught her eye. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Charles, the man who had taught her to steal, browsing the shelves with a casual air that suggested he had been in Calico for some time. He looked up and saw her, and his expression shifted from surprise to something calculating. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, approaching her. "What a pleasant surprise. I had heard you married some rancher and settled down out here, but I hardly believed it." Eleanor's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "What are you doing here, Charles?" "Just passing through," he said with a shrug. "Calico is a booming little town, lots of opportunities for a man with initiative, but I must say you look well. Domestic life suits you." "I need to go," Eleanor said, turning toward the door, but Charles caught her arm. "Not so fast," he said quietly, his grip firm but not quite painful. "You and I have some catching up to do. Perhaps you could help me get reacquainted with the town for old time's sake." "Let go of me," Eleanor said, her voice low but fierce. "I am not that person anymore, and I want nothing to do with you." Charles studied her for a moment, then released her arm. "Fair enough," he said. "But remember, Eleanor, I know things about you, things your new husband and this respectable little town might find very interesting. It would be a shame if those secrets came to light." Eleanor felt sick, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze squarely. "Do your worst," she said. "I have nothing to hide. I have already told my husband everything about my past, and he chose to marry me anyway. You have no power over me anymore." She walked out of the store without looking back, her legs trembling but her head held high. Charles watched her go, and though he smiled, there was a hardness in his eyes that suggested he did not take rejection well. When Eleanor arrived home, she told Yates immediately about the encounter. He listened carefully, his expression growing darker with each word, and when she finished, he pulled her into his arms. "He cannot hurt you," Yates said firmly. "Not while I am here. And if he tries to cause trouble, the sheriff is a friend of mine. We will handle this together." But handling it proved more complicated than they had hoped. Over the following weeks, small things began to go wrong at the ranch. Fences were cut, allowing cattle to wander. Tools went missing from the barn. Someone poisoned one of the chickens. And though they had no proof, Eleanor was certain it was Charles's doing. The situation came to a head one evening, when Yates returned from town with news that Charles had been spreading rumors about Eleanor. telling anyone who would listen that she was a thief and a criminal who had fled San Francisco to escape arrest. The good people of Calico, who had welcomed Eleanor so warmly, were now whispering behind their hands and looking at her with suspicion. Eleanor was devastated. She had worked so hard to build a new life, to become someone respectable, and now it felt like it was all crumbling around her. She sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands while Yates paced angrily, trying to figure out what to do. "I will confront him," Yates said. "I will make him stop." "No," Eleanor said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "Violence will not solve this. It will only make things worse." "Then what do you suggest?" Yates asked, frustration clear in his voice. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she straightened her shoulders, and Yates saw a flash of the determination that had first drawn him to her. "I suggest we tell the truth," she said. "All of it. I will go into town and address the rumors myself, own up to my past, and explain how and why I left it behind. If people still choose to judge me, then so be it. But I will not let Charles control the narrative any longer." Yates looked at her with admiration and concern. "Are you sure? Once you tell people, you cannot take it back." "I am sure," Eleanor said. "I am tired of being afraid, and I am tired of letting my past define me. It is time to face this head-on." The next Sunday, Eleanor stood up in church before the service began and asked if she could address the congregation. The preacher, a kind man who had married her and Yates, agreed, and Eleanor walked to the front of the small building, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "I know there have been rumors about me lately," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the silent space. "And I am here to tell you that some of them are true. Before I came to Calico, I lived in San Francisco, and I did things I am not proud of. I stole from people to survive, and I was involved with a man who taught me to break the law. I am not going to make excuses for what I did, because there are none. I was wrong, and I am deeply ashamed of that part of my life." She paused, looking out at the faces of the people she had come to know over the past 2 years. Some looked shocked, others judgmental, but many were simply listening. "But I am also here to tell you that I am not that person anymore," Eleanor continued. "When I came to Calico, I was looking for a second chance, a way to start over and build an honest life. Yates gave me that chance, even after I told him the truth about my past. He believed that people can change, that mistakes do not have to define us forever. And I have spent every day since trying to prove that belief right." She glanced at Yates, who sat in the front pew with James on his lap, his expression proud and encouraging. "I understand if some of you do not want to associate with me anymore," Eleanor said, turning back to the congregation. "I cannot control how you feel or what you think, but I wanted you to hear the truth from me, not from someone who is trying to cause trouble. I am Eleanor Norton, and I am a wife, a mother, and a member of this community. And I am asking you to judge me not by who I was, but by who I am trying to become." She stepped down from the front and walked back to her seat, her hands shaking but her head held high. The silence in the church was deafening, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then, from the back of the room, an older woman stood up. "I came to Calico 30 years ago after leaving a husband who beat me," the woman said, her voice quavering but strong. "I was running from my past too, and this town gave me a place to start over. I see no reason why Eleanor should not have the same opportunity." Another person stood, a shopkeeper who had once been a gambler back east and had lost everything before coming west. Then another, and another, each sharing their own stories of mistakes and second chances. By the time the preacher called for the service to begin, more than half the congregation had stood in solidarity with Eleanor, and even those who had not stood seemed less hostile than before. After the service, people approached Eleanor with kindness and encouragement, thanking her for her honesty and assuring her that she was welcome in their community. It was overwhelming and humbling, and as she walked out of the church with Yates and James, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. But the confrontation with Charles was not over. That evening he showed up at the ranch, drunk and angry, shouting accusations and demanding that Eleanor pay him for his silence. Yates met him at the door with his rifle, and though he did not point it at Charles, the threat was clear. "You need to leave," Yates said calmly. "Right now." "Or what?" Charles sneered. "You will shoot me. I do not think you have it in you. Try me," Yates said, and there was something in his eyes that made Charles take a step back. "She is a thief," Charles spat. "She does not deserve this life." "She is my wife," Yates said. "And she is worth 10 of you. Now get off my property before I have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing." Charles glared at him, then at Eleanor, who stood behind Yates with James in her arms. "This is not over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Eleanor said firmly. "I am not afraid of you anymore, Charles. You have no power over me. Go find someone else to torment, because I am done letting you control my life." Charles stared at her for a long moment, and something in her expression must have convinced him she meant it, because he finally turned and stumbled back to his horse. He rode away into the night, and they never saw him again. The sheriff later informed them that Charles had left Calico entirely, heading north toward Nevada, and good riddance. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The rumors died down as people found other things to talk about, and Eleanor's honesty in church had earned her a respect that gossip could not take away. She and Yates continued to work the ranch, and James grew into a bright, energetic child who loved helping his father with the animals and following his mother around the house. 2 years later, in the summer of 1887, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was a sweet-tempered baby with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and James took his role as big brother very seriously, always wanting to help with her care. The ranch prospered, and with the profits, Yates was able to expand their land and improve their home. They added a room onto the house for the children, built a better barn, and even installed a hand pump in the kitchen so Eleanor did not have to carry water from the well. It was a good life, a hard life at times, but a good one nonetheless. As the children grew, Eleanor made sure to teach them the importance of honesty and integrity. She told them age-appropriate versions of her own story, wanting them to understand that everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is learning from them and striving to be better. She wanted them to grow up knowing that their mother was not perfect, but that she had fought hard to become someone they could be proud of. Yates often marveled at the woman his wife had become. She was strong and capable, a devoted mother and a true partner in every sense of the word. The frightened, guilt-ridden woman who had stepped off the stage in Calico all those years ago had transformed into someone confident and secure in her place in the world. And he was proud to have been part of that transformation, proud that he had seen the potential in her when she could not see it herself. One evening in the fall of 1890, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Yates sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert hills. Eleanor leaned against Yates's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long while. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Giving me a second chance?" Yates turned to look at her, surprised. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor. You and the children, this life we have built together." "I just worry sometimes," Eleanor admitted. That my past will come back to haunt us somehow, or that I will never fully escape the person I used to be. You already have escaped her, Yates said gently. That woman in San Francisco was surviving the only way she knew how. You are not her anymore. You have not been for a long time. And even if your past did come back, we would handle it together, just like we handle everything else. Eleanor smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of love and gratitude that always came when she thought about how lucky she was to have found Yates. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Yates replied, and he kissed the top of her head. Always will. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and challenges that come with any life. James grew into a tall, thoughtful young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's sense of justice. Rose was spirited and clever, with a talent for singing that delighted everyone who heard her. In 1893, Eleanor gave birth to their third child, another son they named Henry, who was the image of his father and had a laugh that could light up the darkest day. The ranch continued to thrive under Yates's careful management, and they became one of the more successful families in the area. But success did not change them. They remained humble and generous, always willing to help their neighbors and contribute to the community. Eleanor became known for her charitable work, organizing food drives for families who had fallen on hard times and teaching sewing classes to young women in town. She never forgot what it was like to struggle, and she made sure to extend the same grace to others that had been extended to her. As the 19th century drew to a close, Calico began to change. The silver mines that had brought prosperity to the town started to play out, and people began leaving for opportunities elsewhere. But Yates and Eleanor stayed, committed to the land and the life they had built. The ranch was their home, and they had no desire to go anywhere else. One afternoon in the spring of 1899, Eleanor was working in her garden when a stranger rode up to the house. He was an older man, well-dressed and riding a fine horse, and he introduced himself as a lawyer from San Francisco. Eleanor's heart sank, immediately thinking the worst, but the man quickly put her fears to rest. I am here on behalf of a client who wishes to remain anonymous, the lawyer said. This client heard about your story some years ago and was very moved by your journey from difficult circumstances to a respectable life. They have instructed me to present you with a gift. He handed Eleanor an envelope, and inside she found a bank draft for a substantial sum of money. There was also a letter, written in an elegant hand, explaining that the anonymous benefactor had once been in a similar situation and wanted to help others who were trying to better themselves. The money was a gift, no strings attached, to use however Eleanor and Yates saw fit. Eleanor was overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face as she read the letter over and over. Yates came out of the barn and listened in amazement as she explained what had happened. That evening they sat down with the children, who were now old enough to understand, and talked about what to do with the unexpected windfall. We could expand the ranch even more, Yates suggested. Buy more land, more cattle. Or we could invest in the children's education, Eleanor said. Make sure they have opportunities we never did. Or we could help others, James said thoughtfully. He was 16 now, mature beyond his years. There are a lot of families in Calico struggling since the mines started closing. We could use the money to help them. Eleanor and Yates looked at each other and smiled. Their son had inherited the best of both of them. In the end, they did a bit of everything. They invested in the ranch and set aside money for the children's futures, but they also used a portion of the gift to establish a fund for families in need in Calico. It was administered through the church, providing help with food, medical expenses, and other necessities for those who were struggling. Eleanor insisted it be done anonymously, not wanting recognition, just wanting to pass on the generosity that had been shown to her. The fund made a real difference in the community, helping families stay afloat during hard times and giving people hope when they needed it most. And for Eleanor, it was a way of completing the circle, of taking the second chance she had been given and extending it to others. As the new century dawned, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had taken. From the desperate streets of San Francisco to the peaceful ranch in Calico, from a woman running from her past to a woman at peace with herself, she had come so far. And through it all, Yates had been there, steady and supportive, believing in her even when she did not believe in herself. One evening in the summer of 1902, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, a tradition they had maintained for years. James was preparing to leave for college in San Francisco in the fall, studying to become a lawyer. Rose, now 15, was already showing signs of her mother's business sense and was talking about opening her own dress shop in town someday. Henry, at 9 years old, was still deciding what he wanted to be, but he had his father's way with animals and would likely follow in his footsteps on the ranch. "Tell us again how you and Father met," Rose asked, leaning against her mother's knee. It was a story the children never tired of hearing. Eleanor smiled and glanced at Yates, who chuckled. "Well," she began, "I stepped off a stage in Calico on a hot September day in 1883, scared and uncertain and carrying more secrets than I should have. And your father was waiting for me, a kind stranger who had agreed to marry someone he had never met." "And you fell in love right away?" Henry asked, his eyes wide. "Not right away," Yates said, reaching over to take Eleanor's hand, "but pretty quickly. Your mother was the bravest person I had ever met, and I knew from the start that she was special." "Even though Mother told you she had been a thief?" James asked. He knew the full story now, and it had only increased his respect for both his parents. "Especially because of that," Yates said. "It took incredible courage for her to be honest with me, and that honesty was the foundation of everything we built together." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the same rush of love she had felt on that long-ago evening when Yates had told her that everyone deserves a second chance. "Your father taught me that our mistakes do not have to define us," she said to the children. "That we all have the power to change and grow and become better than we were. That is the most important lesson I can pass on to you." The children nodded seriously, understanding that this was more than just a story. It was a legacy, a set of values that would guide them through their own lives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eleanor leaned into Yates and closed her eyes, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. She had come to California looking for escape, for a place to hide from her past, but what she had found was so much more. She had found love and redemption and a home. She had found herself. "Thank you," she whispered to Yates, so quietly that only he could hear. "For what?" he asked, though he knew. "For seeing me," she said. "For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. For giving me a second chance." "You gave me a second chance too," Yates said softly. "A chance to love and be loved, to build a family, to be more than just a lonely rancher watching his life pass by. We saved each other, Eleanor. That is what love does." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, surrounded by their children and the land they loved. Two people who had found each other across impossible odds and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. And if their story proved anything, it was that redemption is always possible, that everyone deserves a second chance, and that love, true love, can heal even the deepest wounds. In the years that followed, the Norton family continued to thrive. James became a successful lawyer in San Francisco, but he never forgot his roots and returned to Calico often to visit. He eventually married a schoolteacher named Alice, and they gave Eleanor and Yates their first grandchildren. Rose did indeed open a dress shop in Calico, and it became the most popular place for women's clothing in the county. She married the son of the local banker, a good man named Thomas who adored her, and they had 4 children who filled the house with laughter. Henry took over the ranch when Yates's age made the work difficult, running it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and together they expanded the operation, becoming one of the largest cattle operations in San Bernardino County. Eleanor and Yates lived to see all their grandchildren born and to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary in 1933. The celebration was held at the ranch, with family and friends coming from all over California to honor the couple who had become legends in Calico. People spoke of their generosity, their kindness, and the example they had set for their children and community. And Eleanor, now in her 70s, spoke briefly about the importance of second chances and forgiveness, themes that had defined her life. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1935, at the age of 84. Eleanor held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart broke at losing him, she was grateful for the 52 years they had shared. He had been her partner, her protector, her best friend, and the love of her life. She knew with absolute certainty that he had made her a better person, and she hoped she had done the same for him. Eleanor lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and working in her garden at the ranch. She passed away quietly in the spring of 1940, surrounded by family, and her last words were of Yates and the beautiful life they had built together. They were buried side by side in the Calico Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Yates and Eleanor Norton, beloved parents and grandparents." They believed in second chances and built a life of love. And though the town of Calico eventually faded as the mines closed and people moved away, the Norton family remained, generation after generation, a living testament to the power of forgiveness, redemption, and love. The ranch is still there today, passed down through the family and still operating, though the house has been expanded and modernized over the years. But if you stand on the porch at sunset, you can almost see them, Yates and Eleanor, sitting together in the fading light, their hands intertwined, their love as enduring as the desert itself. Their story became the stuff of family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and the values that defined them. And so the legacy of a mail-order bride who had been a thief and a cowboy who believed everyone deserves a second chance lived on. A story of redemption and love in the Wild West that proved that sometimes the most broken among us can build the most beautiful lives, if only someone is willing to give us a chance.